In this episode, we'll take a look at the Mars 300, which is an HDMI video transmission system, so you can use remote monitors. First question is, why would you need to wirelessly transmit your video feed? And if you're a solo filmmaker, solo shooter, probably you don't need it. But if you are working on a bigger crew where you have a director, a DP, a sound mixer, so on and so forth, in those cases, it can start to make a little bit more sense and to be pretty helpful. We did a recent shoot with the Mars 300, and I worked with Austin Bereni, who was the director, and Levi Whitney, who was the director of photography. We fed video from the Sony FS5 using the Mars 300 over to a little port keys monitor. What this allowed Austin, the director, to do was spend more time with the not very experienced actors, and then Levi, the director of photography, could frame things up, and Austin already had a view of how things were framed up and how the shot was set up. So that gave him the freedom to work with these less experienced actors. He'd worked a lot with Levi in the past already and could pretty easily communicate to Levi what he wanted, and this is exactly why a director's monitor that's wireless can be so helpful. So what does the Mars 300 do? It is a video HDMI transmitter, so it will take an HDMI feed from your camera, transmit it to a receiver, which then has two HDMI outputs, and you can connect that, for example, to a monitor. So we used it primarily as a director's monitor in this particular shoot, and it can transmit HD, so 1080p, up to 60 frames per second. First, just quickly running through, the transmitter is an all-metal body, very, very sturdy. It has two HDMI ports. One is an input, of course, from the camera, and the other is an output, so you can have a monitor on the camera in addition to the wireless monitor. There's a locking DC 6 to 16 volt input. This is useful if you're powering from AC with the included AC to DC adapter, or if you're using an external battery like a cinema-style battery. There is also a battery sled on the back, which takes Sony NPF-style batteries, also known as Sony L-series batteries. We used one with an NPF 750, which lasted over 4 hours. Of course, there's a power switch. It's a little bit recessed, which is nice so you don't accidentally bump it off. There's a pair button, which makes it easy to pair with the receiver. There's a channel button so you can change channels. Two LED indicators for link and video. Two SMA antenna connectors so you can replace the antenna if damaged. Of course, it comes with two antennas for the transmitter, two for the receiver, plus an extra for that inevitable case when you will break one of them. There is a 1/4-20 tap on the bottom of the unit, so you can use that to attach to a camera or a friction arm, is what we did. But you can also attach a 1/4-20 to the back of the unit if you wanted to orient it a little bit differently on a smaller camera. There's a USB micro port for firmware updates. Also included in the kit is a hot shoe mount, so you can mount it on your small cameras or on your camera rig, a 1/4-20 mounting plate, and an AC adapter. The receiver, really pretty much the same in terms of build quality, also has the DC power input, also has the MPF type battery sled, power switch, pair button, link, video LEDs, SMA connectors for the antenna, 1/4-20 tap, and USB port, all exactly the same. The difference is on the receiver, there are two HDMI output ports, which is really nice. So if you're going to connect two different monitors for some reason, you have that option. There is also a channel OSD button, so this can actually change the channel, but it also displays an on-screen display on your monitor if you need to see what's happening in terms of pairing status. Now, in terms of distance, this did quite well. On our film shoot, we were working at just a local park, and there was a huge cell tower right nearby, and we were able to get easily over 75 meters away. We never really pushed it beyond that because we didn't need to, but at one point we also had the director grab the camera to do some pickup shots. The DP was hidden underneath a park bench, a big metal park bench, just to kind of stay out of the way, and we didn't get any drops there either, and that was when we were pushing kind of 75 meters or so. So outdoors, it seemed to do pretty well, and that's where I think a lot of wireless systems tend to fall apart a little bit, is that when you get outdoors and there's nothing for the RF signals to bounce off of, you don't get very good range typically. This one actually worked really well. Also took it indoors to do some testing at an office and throughout my home, and we never dropped a signal, even though we had two doors and a separate story in my home. In the office, we had lots of other Wi-Fi going on. 8 different Wi-Fi networks were detected, and I was able to walk around walls and things of that nature, and we never lost a signal there either. So it seems to hold up pretty well. Now, with HDMI, there's almost always some latency, and in fact, that is no exception here with the Hollyland Mars 300. You get about 100 milliseconds of latency. That is the time from when the signal is sent from the transmitter to the receiver is about 100 milliseconds. So there's some work it needs to do. And in addition to that, you need to take into account any latency that your own camera may add to the overall equation there. So for example, here's a demonstration of what it looks like on a Panasonic GH5. And it looks like about probably a half a second of latency overall, if I had to guess. So that's something to keep in mind. If latency is really important to you, realistically, you're going to get some here, and it's really up to you to decide if that's too much latency for you or not. I think in use as a director's monitor, that's not really a big issue. Now, the price for this kit is $499 US. Let's put that price in context a little bit. In terms of HDMI and SDI video transmission systems, they tend to be quite expensive. So for example, if you go look at Teradek, the least expensive one I found there was over $1,200, and that's for the Bolt LT, which is the kind of roughly the equivalent of what we're looking at here, just HDMI transmission, no SDI, so on and so forth. That may have some additional features that this doesn't have, but that's a significant difference in price. And for what you're getting here for $499 US, it seems pretty fair based on the technology, how far it's been developed, how well this particular unit works, so on and so forth. So some people are going to freak out and say, oh my gosh, that's super expensive. I'm not here to suggest that you should buy this before you buy your camera and lenses, your lighting gear especially, and your good audio gear. Not here to suggest that to you, but for smaller productions where you do have a crew, where you do have a director and a DP and a sound mixer and perhaps some production assistants, that's when something like this starts to make sense. And this is probably one of the least expensive, reliable ways to get into that HDMI transmission system. Let's run through the pros really quickly. First of all, very reliable transmission within line of sight and even around some barriers and walls. Using the 5.8 gigahertz frequency, which is what this uses to transmit, I was expecting a lot more dropouts, especially once you start walking around walls on the interiors. And I was surprised at how well this worked, so seemed to hold up very nicely. In terms of build quality and fit and finish, this is really pretty top-notch, better than I expected, certainly. And I think it really is built to last. So you've got the locking connector for the DC power input. You've got a nice locking mechanism on the NPF battery sleds, which a lot of them are just friction-based on a lot of less expensive gear. This one actually has a lock that you actually push a button to release the battery, which is nice as well. And of course, HDMI doesn't have a locking mechanism, but overall, the build quality was really, really nice. I like that you can power via NPF-style batteries or DC input. And again, we got over 4 hours on a single NPF 750 battery, which was quite good. Very simple to pair. Literally, you just push a couple buttons, hold them down for a few seconds, and it pairs right up. It's also nice that you can have an on-screen display on the receiver with the monitor that's connected to it, so you can see what the status of the pairing is. I like that the SMA antenna are replaceable, so you do have options there in case things go bad and you drop it or break it somehow. I like the dual quarter 20 connection points. It's also nice that it includes a quarter 20 mounting plate, a hot shoe adapter, and a locking DC adapter. And again, the price is really quite good for what you're getting here. Now, no product is perfect, so what were the things that gave us a little bit of pause? Now, this is getting really nitpicky, but it can be a little bit awkward to mount to the back of a monitor, so we actually ended up just gaff taping it to the back of our monitor. That was just the most ergonomic way to do things. And you basically have two options. You have the quarter 20 on the bottom of the unit, which makes it really awkward and stick out from a monitor, or you can mount it from the back. That one makes a little bit more sense, but on the monitor end, it made most sense to us to just gaff tape it to the back of the monitor, so that worked okay in the end. If latency is going to be a problem for you, you need to know this has 100 milliseconds of latency plus whatever your camera has in terms of latency. That can add up pretty quickly, as you saw with the GH5 here. If you need something that's no latency, you probably really need to be looking at an SDI solution as opposed to HDMI, but just so you're aware, there is some latency there. One last thing, again, being pretty nitpicky here, but just so you're aware, when we did our tests here with the Panasonic GH5, we were outputting from the HDMI port at 23.976 frames per second, and what we found was that the receiver was actually outputting 24 frames per second. So it's doing some funny stuff there to kind of change the frame rate. I wouldn't use this for recording anyway, this transmission system, but if for some reason that's important to you, it's important to know that it does round up the frame rates to the integers. So for example, when we went to 29.97 on the camera output, we were getting 30 frames per second at the receiver, and likewise 59.94 at the camera output, we were getting 60 frames per second at the receiver. For a director's monitor, I don't think that's going to be an issue at all, but for those of you that are very picky about understanding what's happening on both ends of the receiver and the transmitter, there is some kind of rounding that's going on there, so just so you're aware. So there's a quick look at the Mars 300. I think overall that was a really good kit in addition for our particular shoot. Hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.